Whispers of the Ages presents Ash and Empire, the story of the Greek, Persian Wars. Close your eyes. Let the day drift away. Breathe in slowly. And let it out. Tonight, we'll travel back through time, not to battles or noise, but to a quieter world. Imagine the year is 499 BC. The Aegean Sea stretches before you, calm and endless, carrying the scent of salt and pine. The air is warm and the stars above shine like lanterns hung by the gods. You are safe here, just a traveler passing through history, listening as the ancient world whispers its stories, each wave against the shore, each flicker of torchlight in a distant city, invites you deeper into rest, and soon into sleep. They say the gods laugh when mortals make plans. In the year 499 BC, as Persian couriers raced across the royal road carrying news of rebellion, I wonder if they were laughing then. My name matters little now. I was there when empires clashed, when the fate of the world balanced on the edge of a bronze spear. This is the story of fire and freedom, of hubris and heroism. It began not with armies, but with one man's desperate gamble. Picture Aristagoras of Miletus, not as the noble freedom fighter poets would later paint him, but as he truly was. A man of middle years, soft from Persian gold, with nervous hands that never stopped moving. His eyes darted like a cornered rat's, always calculating, always scheming. He had failed spectacularly. The conquest of Naxos, his chance to prove himself to his Persian masters, had crumbled like a sandcastle before the tide. Now he faced a choice: death at Persian hands, or something far more dangerous. Standing before the assembled citizens of Miletus, Aristagoras cast off his Persian cloak like a snake shedding its skin. His voice trembled with forced conviction as he spoke of freedom, of dignity, of Greeks who had forgotten they were meant to bow to no man. The crowd stirred. These were merchants, fishermen, craftsmen, men who had lived under Persian rule for decades. They knew the weight of tribute, the humiliation of bowing to satraps who spoke their names like curses. His words found fertile ground in hearts long frustrated by foreign rule. It was a performance worthy of the theater. And like all great performances, it worked because it told people what they desperately wanted to hear. But Aristagoras was cunning enough to know that words alone wouldn't topple an empire. He needed allies. He needed ships. He needed the fury of free men with nothing left to lose. So he sailed west, first to Sparta, where he met a man who would have eaten lesser mortals for breakfast. Cleomenes the First. Picture a wolf in human form. Tall, scarred, with eyes like winter ice. He had spent his life turning Sparta into a weapon and himself into its sharpest edge. When he spoke, even veteran warriors stepped back. Aristagoras pleaded his case before the Spartan king, painting visions of Persian wealth and Greek liberation. But when Cleomenes asked how far it was from the sea to the Persian capital, the answer doomed the mission. 3 months' march, perhaps 4. No Spartan would march that far from home to fight another man's war. Aristagoras tried bribes. First 10 talents of silver, then 20, then 50. But Cleomenes remained unmoved. They say his young daughter finally tugged at his cloak and whispered that the stranger would corrupt him if he didn't send him away. The wolf had made his decision. Sparta would not come. But Athens was different. Athens in 499 BC was an experiment that terrified kings across the known world. Imagine a city where cobblers could shout down aristocrats, where policy was decided not in palace chambers, but in the blazing heat of public debate. They had just expelled their tyrant, Hippias, and tasted freedom like wine. It made them bold, it made them reckless, it made them dangerous. In their assembly, voices clashed like bronze on bronze. Some argued that the Ionians had helped them once, when they threw out their tyrant and deserved aid in return. Others questioned why Athens should meddle in Persian affairs when they had troubles enough at home. But when Aristogoras spoke of democracy threatened, of free cities groaning under tyranny's yoke, of the chance to humble the mightiest empire on earth with just 20 ships, the assembly listened. The idea of sticking a spear in the belly of empire sounded like glory to young men drunk on their newfound freedom. They voted. 20 ships would sail east. It seemed like such a small number. How could 20 ships change the world? They were about to find out. The combined Greek and Ionian force numbered perhaps 5,000 men. They marched inland from Ephesus, climbing the dusty roads toward Sardis, the gleaming seat of Persian power in the west. Picture Sardis as it was then, marble columns reaching toward heaven, gardens that bloomed with flowers from across the empire, the Acropolis rising like a golden crown above the city. It was beautiful. It was proud. It was utterly unprepared for war. The city fell in hours. Persian guards, fat on easy duty, scattered before Greek spears like leaves before a storm. The governor fled to his citadel with what men he could gather. And then, in the chaos of victory, someone made a mistake that would echo through history. Whether by accident or fury, fire leaped from building to building. Sardis was largely built of wood, even its temples. The flames spread like a living thing, devouring everything in their path. Greek soldiers watched in horror as their victory became an inferno. By nightfall, the greatest city of western Anatolia was a funeral pyre. The Greeks, suddenly sobered by what they had unleashed, retreated toward the coast. They had struck their blow against empire. Now they would learn the price. For 1,000 miles east, in the heart of Persepolis, a different kind of fire was kindling. Darius I, King of Kings, ruler of the greatest empire the world had ever known, received the news in his private chamber. Picture him not as a distant tyrant, but as he was. A man in his 50s, graying beard meticulously groomed, eyes sharp as a hawk's. He had built this empire through cunning, ruthlessness, and an absolute belief in his own divine right to rule. The messenger trembled as he delivered his report. Sardis was gone, burned to ash. The rebels had struck without warning, then vanished like smoke, and leading them, Greeks from the mainland, from a city called Athens. Darius asked who these Athenians were, and the answer came back. A small democracy beyond the Aegean, perhaps 20,000 souls living by trade and argument. The King of Kings stood silent for a full minute, staring at the map of his empire spread across his table. Then he called for his most trusted servant. From that day forward, Darius commanded when he dined each evening, his servant would approach his table and speak these words 3 times. "Master, remember the Athenians." And so began a ritual that would continue for 10 years. Every evening, as the sun set over Persepolis, as the King of Kings broke bread in his golden hall, those words would ring out like a bell of doom. But Darius would do more than remember. He would act. Vengeance, the Persians knew, was a dish best served overwhelming. For 5 years, the Ionian revolt had raged like wildfire across the eastern Aegean. Cities rose and fell, heroes were made and broken. But by 494 BC, only one flame still flickered against the gathering darkness: the island of Lade, the last stand. Picture the harbor near Miletus on that final morning. 350 Greek ships drawn up in battle lines, triremes, pentaconters, every vessel that could float and fight. It was the largest Greek fleet ever assembled, and everyone knew it would probably be the last. Their commander was Dionysius of Phocea, a man carved from salt and iron. 40 years at sea had weathered his face like driftwood, but his eyes still burned with the fire that had made him legend. He knew ships the way other men knew their wives, could read wind and wave like sacred text. For weeks, he drilled them mercilessly. His voice carried across the water as he shouted orders. Rule like your lives depend on it, because they do. Formation fighting, ramming tactics, the brutal discipline that separated living crews from dead heroes. But unity was harder to forge than bronze. The Samians grumbled about fighting for Miletus. The Chians stood proud and defiant. The men of Lesbos scoffed at taking orders from Phocea. Each contingent had come to defend their own cities, not to die in foreign wars. Across the water, the Persian fleet approached like a moving mountain. 600 ships or more, Phoenician warships with bronze rams, sharp as spear points, Egyptian vessels tall as floating towers, and scattered among them, the familiar lines of Ionian Greeks who had chosen survival over freedom. But the Persians brought more than bronze and timber. They brought gold, enough to buy betrayal. In secret meetings under cover of darkness, Persian agents approached the Samian leaders. They spoke of amnesty, of mercy, of the chance to live while their allies died. Some hesitated. Most listened. The battle began at dawn. Hundreds of ships converged on choppy waters, bronze rams gleaming like teeth, spears bristling from every deck. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath as the two fleets closed the distance between them. Then the Samians broke. One moment they were holding the left flank, the next they were rowing for home with the speed of men fleeing death itself. A third of the Ionian fleet vanished in minutes, leaving a gap in the Greek line wide enough to sail a trireme through. But not all fled. The Chians, proud, stubborn islanders bred to the sea, refused to yield. Their captains roared defiance as they charged into the Persian center like lions into a pack of wolves. Outnumbered 3-1, they fought with the fury of men who had nothing left to lose. 3 times they broke the Persian line. 3 times they regrouped for another charge, their heavy ships battering through enemy formations like rams blessed by the gods. When their vessels were holed and sinking, they leapt into the water with swords clenched in their teeth. When they reached shore, they fought with daggers. When the daggers broke, they fought with stones. Of 100 Chian ships, fewer than 10 escaped. But they had shown the world what it meant to die Greek, and that lesson would echo in the years to come. By noon, it was over. The sea was a graveyard of broken ships and broken dreams. Miletus stood alone, her fleet scattered to the winds, her allies fled or dead. The city fell within days, its men slaughtered, its women and children sold into slavery, its temples defiled by foreign hands. News of Miletus reached Athens like a physical blow. In the theater of Dionysus, a poet named Phrynichus staged a play about the capture of the city. The audience didn't applaud. They wept. They screamed. They fined the poor poet 1,000 drachmas for reminding them of their shame and their abandoned allies. But weeping wouldn't save them from what was coming. Darius had not forgotten his evening ritual, and now it was time to turn memory into action. The first expedition, led by his son-in-law Mardonius, met disaster in the storms off Mount Athos. Ships scattered like leaves, men drowned by the thousand, dreams of conquest swallowed by the hungry sea. But Darius was nothing if not persistent. Empires weren't built by men who quit at the first setback. In 490 BC, heralds galloped into cities across Greece bearing the traditional Persian demand: earth and water, symbols of submission to the great king. Most Greek cities complied, sending the tokens that meant their freedom was forfeit. Sparta threw the heralds into a well. Athens cast them into a pit. Both cities had given their answer written in defiance itself. The Persian fleet landed at Marathon, 25,000 men on a beach where the Greeks could marshal perhaps half that number. But among those Greeks stood a man who would change the course of history. Miltiades the Younger, a general who had lived among Persians, learned their ways, understood their strengths and weaknesses better than any Greek alive. Graying, scarred, carrying the weight of a dozen campaigns, he saw what others missed. The Persians were strongest at range, weakest in close combat. He addressed the Greek war council with calm confidence. They couldn't match Persian numbers or arrows, he told them, but they could match Persian hearts, and Greek hearts burned hotter. The battle plan he proposed was madness disguised as genius. Strengthen the wings, weaken the center, and pray the gods smiled on a desperate men. They charged across a mile of open ground, 10,000 Greeks screaming like madmen, spears leveled, shields locked, running straight into the storm of Persian arrows. Picture it through enemy eyes. These wild Greeks, their bronze armor flashing in the sun, their battle cries shaking the very earth. No army had ever charged the Persians like this. No enemy had ever shown such beautiful, terrifying madness. The Persian center held under the Greek assault, their discipline intact, even as bronze-tipped spears thrust between their shields. But on the flanks, where Miltiades had concentrated his strength, the Persian line crumbled like sand before the tide. Greek veterans, hardened by years of border wars, carved through Persian ranks with methodical efficiency. And when the Greek wings wheeled inward, trapping the Persian center in a bronze embrace, the slaughter became complete. 6,000 Persian dead carpeted the beach, while the survivors fled to their ships, sails already unfurling for the retreat across wine-dark waters. Athens had won. Greece had won. The greatest empire on earth had been humbled by a handful of farmers with spears. They say a messenger named Phidippides ran the 26 miles from Marathon to Athens with nothing but joy in his lungs and victory on his tongue. He died with the word Nike, victory, still on his lips. But that night, as funeral pyres burned on the beach at Marathon, as Athens celebrated and Persia mourned, everyone knew this was only the beginning. Darius would return with a larger army, and the real test was yet to come. 10 years. That's how long it took for the son to finish what the father had started. 10 years for Xerxes to transform his father's dream of revenge into something far more terrifying, the largest invasion force the world had ever seen. I was older then. Gray touched my beard, and my sword arm wasn't quite as quick, but I could still smell war on the wind, and in the spring of 480 BC, that wind carried the scent of 1,000,000 men marching west. They called him the God King, but before he was a god, he was simply a man who had inherited the greatest grudge in history. Picture Xerxes as he truly was, not the golden giant of Greek nightmares, but a man in his 30s. Tall, yes, but carrying the weight of impossible expectations. His father Darius had conquered from India to the Black Sea. What worlds were left for a son to claim? His advisors spoke cautiously of turning east toward India, of consolidating their vast holdings, of enjoying the peace that victory should have brought. But Xerxes' voice cut through their counsel like a blade through silk. Every night for 10 years, he reminded them, his father had heard those same words. Master, remember the Athenians. Every night those Greek dogs had lived while the great Darius did not. He would not simply remember them, Xerxes declared. He would erase them from the earth itself. Every man, woman, and child, every stone of their cities, every memory of their existence. Greece would become a Persian province, and its people would learn what it meant to defy the King of Kings. This wouldn't be another expedition like his father had sent. This would be total war, a migration of nations, a reshaping of the world itself. They came from every corner of the empire. Immortals from Persia, their spears glinting like stars. Scythian horse archers from the steppes beyond the Black Sea. War elephants from India, their trumpeting echoing across the plains. Phoenician ships that could outrun the wind itself. But Xerxes' true masterstroke wasn't the size of his army. It was the bridge, the Hellespont, that narrow strait where Europe nearly touches Asia. For centuries it had been the boundary between worlds. Xerxes would make it a highway. His engineers worked like men possessed, lashing 600 ships together with cables thick as a man's waist, creating a bridge that would let an army cross from Asia to Europe as easily as crossing a street. But the gods, it seemed, had other plans. A storm rose from nowhere, winds like fists, waves like mountains. When dawn broke, the bridge was driftwood scattered across the waters, the work of months destroyed in a single night. Xerxes' rage was beyond mortal comprehension. The sea dared defy the King of Kings. He ordered his soldiers to give the Hellespont 300 lashes, to brand it with hot irons, to throw shackles into the waves as if water could be enslaved like a disobedient servant. They did it. Persian soldiers actually whipped the Hellespont like a rebellious slave, and when they were done, Xerxes commanded them to build another bridge, a better bridge. This time, it held. While Persia built bridges, Greece built alliances. The Spartan king Leonidas led a small force north to buy time. 300 of his own warriors, perhaps 7,000 Greeks in total. They would make their stand at Thermopylae, the hot gates where mountain and sea squeezed the coastal road to the width of a cart track. Leonidas was 60 years old, ancient for a warrior. His beard was white as snow, his body scarred from a dozen campaigns, but his eyes still burned with the fire that had made Sparta legend. He told his men they would dine in hell that night, and when one worried that Persian arrows would darken the sky, the old king grinned and said they'd fight in the shade. He had come here to die. Every Spartan knew it. The oracle at Delphi had spoken. Either Sparta would fall or a Spartan king would perish. Leonidas had made his choice, and his men had followed him willingly into the jaws of death. When Xerxes saw the Greek force, a handful of men against his millions, he laughed. He sent a herald with terms that seemed generous beyond measure. The great king was merciful, the messenger declared. If they laid down their arms, they could serve in his army as honored allies. Leonidas's reply became legend. He called back across the narrow pass with a voice that carried like a war horn. Come and take them. For 3 days, Xerxes threw his armies against that wall of bronze and iron. Medes, Scythians, his own immortals, the finest warriors in the world, crashing like waves against a cliff that would not yield. The Spartans fought like machines built for killing. Every motion was perfect, every strike lethal. When their spears broke, they drew swords. When their swords shattered, they fought with the bronze rims of their shields. The Persian dead piled so high that fresh attackers had to climb over their own corpses to reach the Greek line. Again and again the Persians fell back, leaving hundreds of bodies in the pass. The immortals, who had never known defeat, ran like children from the Spartan spears. But Xerxes had learned something his father never had. Sometimes the only way to defeat Greeks was to get another Greek to betray them. His name was Ephialtes, a local man who knew every goat track in these mountains. For a bag of Persian gold, he agreed to lead a force around the Greek position, down a path so narrow the soldiers had to march single file through the darkness. A Spartan scout came running at dawn, breathless with exhaustion and fear. Thousands of Persians were coming down from the heights, he reported. They would be behind the Greek position within the hour. Leonidas heard the news with perfect calm and gave his final orders. The allies were to withdraw. This was Sparta's hour now. Most of the Greeks retreated toward safety, but 700 Thespians stayed to die beside the Spartans. 400 Thebans remained as well, though whether by choice or coercion, none could say. They formed up with their backs to the sea, surrounded by the largest army the world had ever seen, and prepared to sell their lives as dearly as mortals could. They say the Persian arrows were so thick they actually did darken the sky, but the Spartans fought on, not for victory, for there was no victory to be had, but for something more precious, the right to die as free men. Leonidas fell with a dozen arrows in his chest, still reaching for his spear with hands that would not obey his will. His men died around him, not retreating, not surrendering, but selling their lives like the heroes their mothers had raised them to be. When the battle was over, Xerxes walked among the bodies. His soldiers brought him Leonidas's head, and the god king ordered it mounted on a spike. "Let all Greece see what happened to those who defied the King of Kings," he commanded. But even in death, Leonidas had won something more valuable than his life: time. 3 days at Thermopylae had given Athens time to evacuate, time to prepare, time to set a trap that would shake the world. By the time the Persians reached Athens, it was a ghost town. The people had fled to the island of Salamis, taking everything they could carry and leaving the rest to burn. Empty streets echoed with the sound of Persian sandals, and the only Greeks left were those too old or sick to flee. While Athens emptied, one man stayed busy. Themistocles, son of a foreign mother, raised in the back streets, now the most dangerous mind in Greece. He was small, dark, with quick hands and quicker wits. Where other men saw disaster, he saw opportunity. He told his fellow captains they were going to win this war with a lie, the best kind of lie, one that told your enemy exactly what they wanted to hear. While they looked at him as if he'd lost his mind, Themistocles was already working on his plan, a gamble so audacious, so perfectly calculated, that it would either save Greece or destroy it utterly. From their ships, the Greeks watched Athens burn. The Acropolis, where their ancestors had worshipped for centuries, became a torch visible for miles. Persian soldiers danced around the flames, celebrating what they believed was the death of democracy itself. An Athenian sailor wept as he watched his city consumed by fire. Everything they had built, every temple and home, reduced to ash and memory. But Themistocles spoke with quiet confidence about cities that could be rebuilt. If they lost their ships, if they lost their freedom, there would be nothing left to build. His trap was already in motion, and by morning, the god king would learn that some victories came with a terrible price. The Straits of Salamis, a narrow channel between the island and the mainland, barely wide enough for a dozen ships abreast. To most eyes, it looked like a trap waiting to be sprung. Themistocles was counting on that perception. The entire Greek fleet, 378 ships, lay at anchor in the bay like a beaten dog licking its wounds. From his golden throne on the heights above, Xerxes could see them all. Trapped, desperate, ready for the killing blow that would end this war once and for all. It was exactly what Themistocles wanted him to see. That night, as Xerxes planned his final victory, a small boat slipped across the dark waters, carrying the most important message in Greek history. At the oars sat Sisinus, Themistocles' most trusted slave, a man who had learned to be invisible, to speak any language, to lie with the face of an angel. The Persian sentries challenged him as he approached their fleet, but Sisinus spoke their language and claimed to bring word from his master, Themistocles of Athens. He was escorted to the Persian admiral's tent, where he delivered his message with perfect humility. His master sent warning, Sisinus told them. The Greeks planned to flee in the night. Their alliance was crumbling, their courage failing like a candle guttering in the wind. But if the Persians struck at dawn, trapped the Greeks in the narrows, none would escape the king's justice. The Persian admiral asked suspiciously why an Athenian would warn them of Greek plans. Sisinnis's answer was perfectly crafted. His master was a practical man who saw which way the wind was blowing. Better to serve the winning side than die with the losing one. It was exactly what the Persians wanted to hear, that their enemies were cowards, that victory was assured, that the war would end with the dawn. They took the bait completely, hook and line and sinker. All night, Persian ships rode into position like pieces on a great game board. Phoenicians blocked the western exit with their fast, maneuverable vessels. Ionians sealed the eastern passage with ships crewed by men who knew these waters like their own blood. Egyptians filled the channel itself, their tall vessels forming a wall of wood and bronze. By dawn, the Greek fleet would be surrounded completely, or so they believed. Xerxes had his golden throne carried to the heights above the straits, the perfect vantage point to watch democracy drown. Scribes stood ready to record every detail of his triumph. Artists prepared to paint his victory for posterity. Instead, they would witness the death of an empire. Dawn came like a curtain rising on history's greatest drama. In the narrow straits, 600 Persian ships found themselves crammed together like fish in a net. Their superior numbers meant nothing. There wasn't room to maneuver, no space to bring their advantages to bear. The Greek ships came like wolves, fast, coordinated, each captain knowing exactly what his role would be. They had trained in these waters for months, knew every current, every rock, every trick the tide might play. The battle cry that rose from 300 Greek throats could have woken the dead. They struck for freedom, for their burned cities, for their children watching from the heights of Salamis. This was their moment, their chance to prove that free men could stand against any tyranny. Leading the Athenian left wing was Aristides. They called him the Just, the only politician in Athens who couldn't be bribed. Tall, gray-haired, with the kind of calm that made other men brave. He was everything Themistocles was not, and together they worked like sword and shield. His ship, the Perilous, struck a Phoenician vessel amidships. The bronze ram punched through cedar planking like a spear through flesh. As the enemy ship listed and began its death roll, Aristides was already turning for his next target, his voice carrying over the din as he called to his captains to remember their tactics. Ram and retreat, strike and withdraw, don't get trapped in enemy formations. In the center of the channel, chaos reigned like a mad king. Persian ships collided with each other, their carefully planned formations shattered by the narrow waters and the fury of Greek rams. Greek marines leaped from deck to deck like dancers in bronze, their swords flashing in the morning sun. The sea ran red with blood and black with burning oil from shattered hulls. A Persian admiral shouted desperately for his ships to back oars, to form up on the center, not to let the Greeks divide their formations. But it was too late. The Greeks had done more than divide them. They had destroyed their ability to fight as a coordinated force entirely. Each Persian ship was fighting its own battle, cut off from support, surrounded by enemies who knew these waters like lovers. In the thick of the fighting, Xerxes' own brother Aristobulus led a desperate charge to break through the Greek line. He was magnificent in his gold armor, fighting like a hero from the old stories, his voice roaring above the clamor as he called his men to fight for the King of Kings, for Persia eternal. An Athenian marine named Sophocles met him deck to deck, spear to spear. They fought like gods while ships burned around them, thrust, parry, shield bash, the kind of single combat that poets would sing about for generations. But when Aristobulus fell, pierced through the heart by an Athenian spear point, something seemed to go out of the Persian fleet entirely. The king's own brother, dead in the water, his golden armor sinking beneath the waves. The psychological impact rippled through the Persian ranks faster than any signal could travel. From his golden throne, Xerxes watched it all unfold like a nightmare made real. His scribes had stopped writing, their hands frozen over their tablets. His artists had laid down their brushes, unable to capture the magnitude of the disaster. In the space of a morning, his invincible fleet had become a graveyard of broken dreams. An advisor approached with trembling steps to deliver the casualty report. Perhaps half the fleet was gone, he whispered. The rest were fleeing toward the safety of open water, their formations scattered, their morale shattered like pottery dropped on stone. Xerxes sat in silence for a long moment, watching smoke rise from his burning ships. Then he spoke just 2 words that would change the course of history. We returned to Asia. Tonight. The God King had learned he was mortal after all, but the war wasn't over. Xerxes fled back across his bridge with most of his army, but he left behind his cousin Mardonius with 300,000 men. If Persia couldn't rule Greece from the sea, perhaps it could still conquer it by land. The final battle would be fought at a place called Plataea, and there the fate of 2 worlds would be decided once and for all. Leading the Greeks was Pausanias, nephew of dead Leonidas, regent of Sparta, while the true king was still a boy. He was young, barely 28, but he carried the weight of his uncle's sacrifice like armor forged from grief and determination. He addressed the allied army with words that would have made Leonidas proud. They faced the largest Persian army ever to set foot in Greece, he told them. The enemy outnumbered them 3-1. Their cavalry could trample the Greeks like wheat before the scythe. But they had something the Persians didn't. They had Thermopylae in their hearts and Salamis in their souls. They fought not for empire, but for the right to be free. The battle began with a Persian cavalry charge. Thousands of horsemen thundering across the plain like an earthquake made of steel and flesh. But the Greeks had learned from their defeats, had studied Persian tactics, had prepared for exactly this moment. A Spartan captain's voice cut through the thunder of hooves as he ordered spears down and shields locked. The Spartan phalanx met the charging cavalry like a bronze wall that had grown from the earth itself. Horses screamed and fell, their riders flying over their mounts' heads to crash into the waiting spear points. And behind the cavalry came Mardonius himself, magnificent in white and gold, leading his elite guard in one final attempt to break Greek resolve. They say the spear that killed him was thrown by a common Spartan soldier. No name recorded in the histories, no glory claimed by any poet. One moment, the Persian commander was rallying his troops with words of encouragement. The next, he was face down in Greek dirt, his white cloak stained red with his life's blood. The cry went up immediately from the Persian ranks. Mardonius was dead. The general had fallen. Without their commander, without the man who had held their diverse forces together through sheer force of personality, the greatest army Asia had ever assembled simply dissolved. The Greeks didn't just win, they annihilated their enemies with a completeness that stunned even the victors. 40,000 Persian dead carpeted the field of Plataea, their bodies testament to the final failure of Persian ambition. The survivors fled back toward Asia in complete disarray, and this time they didn't stop running until they had crossed the Hellespont. I walked through Athens when we finally came home from the wars. The Persians had burned everything, temples, homes, the ancient olive groves that had fed our families for generations. But we rebuilt, because that's what free men do. Stone by stone, dream by dream. But victory changes men in ways that defeat never can. It hardens them, elevates them, fills them with a sense of their own righteousness that can be more dangerous than any enemy spear. We had beaten the greatest empire on earth, had proven that free men could stand against any tyranny. The question was, what would we do with that power? Themistocles moved quickly to build walls around Athens, not just for protection, but as a symbol of our new power. The Delian League began as an alliance of free cities united against Persian aggression. But alliances have a way of becoming something else entirely when one partner grows stronger than all the others combined. Silver flowed into Athens like rivers. Tribute, they called it, though it looked suspiciously like the taxes that Persia had once collected from these same cities. Athenian citizens spoke proudly of being the liberators of Greece, the saviors of democracy itself. But I remembered other things. I remembered the faces of the Naxians when we forced them back into the league after they tried to leave. I remembered the tears of Samian women when we broke their rebellion and installed a government more to our liking. I remembered the sound of Athenian voices giving orders to men who had once been our equals. We told ourselves we were different from Persia. We told ourselves we fought for freedom, that everything we did was justified by the righteousness of our cause. But when I walked the streets of Athens and heard subject peoples speaking our language, paying our taxes, following our laws whether they wanted to or not, sometimes the voice giving orders sounded very familiar indeed. This was the story of ash and empire, of a fire that began in the markets of Sardis and ended in the streets of Athens, of men who fought for freedom and learned the terrible price that victory demands of the victorious. Aristagoras the gambler died forgotten in the hills of Thrace, his grand rebellion reduced to a footnote in Persian records. Darius died dreaming of revenge he would never see, his evening ritual finally silenced by the grave. Xerxes returned to Persepolis and spent his remaining years building monuments to hide his shame until an assassin's blade ended his torment. But Leonidas became immortal, not because he won, but because he knew the exact value of a noble death. His name would be remembered when the kings of Persia were dust. And Themistocles, the fox who had saved Greece with a lie, he ended his days in exile, ironically in the service of the Persian king whose fleet he had destroyed. The democracy he saved cast him out when his ambitions grew too large for even Athens to contain. I am old now. My sword hangs on the wall, more rust than bronze, a relic of wars that shaped the world. But sometimes, in the evening light, I watch Athenian children playing in the agora, free to speak, free to think, free to dream of futures their grandfathers couldn't imagine. And I remember why we fought. Not for empire, not for glory, not even for the wealth that victory brought us. We fought for that laughter, for that freedom, for the dangerous, beautiful idea that free men need bow to no king, not even kings of their own making. The fire that began in Sardis had burned across 2 continents, consuming cities and armies, kings and common soldiers alike. In the end, it had forged something new in the world, the idea that ordinary people could govern themselves, could choose their own leaders, could live by laws they themselves had made. Whether we would remain worthy of that gift, that was a question for the ages yet to come. I hope you've enjoyed this journey through fire and ash, through the crucible where East met West and the fate of civilization hung in the balance. If these tales of ancient courage and timeless struggle have stirred something within you, I invite you to subscribe and join us as we continue to unearth the stories that shaped our world. And now I turn to you, fellow travelers through time. What moment from history calls to you? What forgotten battle, what pivotal decision, what turning point in human destiny would you have us explore next? Share your thoughts in the comments below, for in your curiosity lies the next tale waiting to be told. Until we meet again in the shadows of the past, remember, we are all heirs to the courage of those who came before.